We have just received a copy of the opening statement former FBI Director James Comey will make tomorrow when he testifies before the Senate Intelligence Committee. That panel is investigating Russian attempts to tamper with the presidential election last year and whether there was any collusion in that by anyone in the Trump campaign. In his statement, Comey says he did give Mr. Trump assurances on a number of occasions that the president was not personally under investigation. He also says in his statement the president asked for his loyalty, to which Comey says he replied, "You will always get honesty from me." Mr. Trump, according to Comey, said, "That's what I want, honest loyalty." The first assurance that Mr. Trump was not under investigation came when he and Comey met at Trump Tower on January the 6th, when Mr. Trump was president-elect. Nancy Cordes is joining us now, and we'll pick up the story right there. Nancy, what happened in that January 6th meeting?
Well, that was where Comey first decided, Scott, that he would keep detailed notes from then on of all of his conversations with the then president-elect and then president of the United States. He says to ensure accuracy, he began to type out on his laptop in an FBI vehicle outside Trump Tower everything that he had said to the president and vice versa. And that's why we now have these verbatim quotes, it appears to be, from Comey and the president in subsequent conversations, both in person and on the phone, in which Comey says that he felt that the president was either trying to extract his loyalty or receive reassurances from him that he would try to tamp down the investigation into the fired National Security Advisor Michael Flynn.
Now, I want to make sure everyone understands what we're talking about. James Comey is scheduled to testify tomorrow before the Senate Intelligence Committee. That committee, a few moments ago, released Comey's opening statement that he intends to deliver tomorrow, and that's where all this information is coming from. Let me bring Nancy Cordes back into the conversation. Nancy, one of the other quotes from the statement regards Michael Flynn, the former National Security Advisor who was fired by President Trump for lying about his contacts with Russians. The president, apparently in a meeting with James Comey at the White House in February, said some of the following, according to Mr. Comey. I think we have a graphic here. The president turned to the topic of Mike Flynn. This is Comey saying this, saying he's a good guy and he has been through a lot. He repeated that Flynn hadn't done anything wrong in his calls with the Russians, but had misled the vice president. He then said, "I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go, to letting Flynn go. He is a good guy. I hope you can let this go." Comey says that Comey, replied only, "He is a good guy." Nancy, where could the president be in trouble on that?
Well, when you read further on, in the details that Comey has provided, he took very interesting action after that conversation. First of all, he once again documented the conversation, and then he says he prepared an unclassified memo about the conversation and discussed it with FBI senior leadership. He says routinely in this statement that he didn't just keep this to himself, that he shared it with senior leadership within the FBI, and at one point even went to senior leadership at the Department of Justice and asked them what they wanted him to do about this. He also points out, Scott, that the FBI leadership team agreed when they discussed this that it was important not to infect the investigative team with the president's request that the investigation be downplayed. And so he said he couldn't abide something like that happening. He didn't intend to abide by it. And so they basically ended up leaving investigators in the dark about these comments that the president was making to Comey. Separately, CBS News has learned and confirmed that Comey actually asked the Attorney General to try to keep him from having to be Comey in the president's company alone because he found that these conversations were awkward and inappropriate. But the conversations laid out in this document show that over the course of a dinner, over the course of that meeting and several phone calls, it was the president who was routinely bringing this up, even as Comey tried to avoid the issue.
And we are watching video of Comey meeting with the president at the White House at an earlier time before all of this broke. There is another quote in Comey's opening statement that he will deliver tomorrow, and I'm going to read that now. On the morning of March 30, the president called me at the FBI. He described the Russia investigation as a cloud that was impairing his ability to act on behalf of the country. He said he had nothing to do with Russia, had not been involved with hookers in Russia, and had always assumed he was being recorded when in Russia. He asked what we could do to lift the cloud, meaning what the FBI could do to lift the cloud. That reference to hookers, by the way, was from a dossier that an investigator had developed in Russia, an investigator who was essentially looking for dirt on Mr. Trump during the campaign and had developed a number of unsubstantiated tales of things that Mr. Trump had allegedly done there. When that dossier became known to the FBI, James Comey went to Trump Tower to brief Donald Trump on what the dossier said. And apparently, according to Comey's testimony tomorrow, he will say that the president referred to that and referred to a cloud over the administration and asked what the administration could do to lift that cloud. Nancy, one of the questions that the former FBI director is due to be asked tomorrow, or certain to be asked tomorrow, will be whether he felt that the president was trying to obstruct justice when he was asking the FBI to lift the cloud, or when he asked Comey to see his way clear to dropping the Flynn investigation.
And the indications we've gotten, Scott, is that he will steer clear of answering that question definitively. In other words, saying that he believes that it amounts to obstruction of justice or not. He's likely to say that he's no longer in the government, and that is for others to decide. What he will say is that these conversations made him uncomfortable, that they were highly unusual, that they were awkward, that he tried to avoid them, and then he will essentially leave it to the senators who are there in the room to draw their own conclusions about whether this amounts to obstruction of justice or not. And certainly there are some Democrats who have already done so and who will see this testimony as further evidence that the president was trying to sway an investigation and that he knew what he was doing when he had these conversations with James Comey. In fact, in one of these conversations that took place over dinner at the White House, and I will note that the president has said in public that this was a dinner that Comey sought, but Comey disputes that in this document. He says that the president called him at lunchtime that day and invited him to dinner that night, and he says that his instincts told him, this is Comey speaking, that the one-on-one setting meant that this dinner was, at least in part, an effort to have me ask for my job again and create some sort of patronage relationship. And that is something that a number of senators from both sides are going to want to drill down on tomorrow, Scott.
Nancy Cordes, thank you very much. CBS News will be bringing you live coverage of Comey's testimony tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock Eastern Time. There's going to be a great deal more about all of this on your local news on this CBS station, on our 24-hour streaming news service, CBSN, and of course right here tonight on the CBS Evening News. Until then, I'm Scott Pelley, CBS News in New York.